Hola amigos, and welcome to the breakdown section of episode 245, Cómo Defenderte Como Viajero en Español. How to defend yourself as a traveler in Spanish. In this episode, Maya and I discussed some useful strategies and phrases for travelers to protect themselves from scams and uncomfortable situations while traveling in Spanish-speaking countries. This conversation was inspired by a personal experience I had a few days ago when I was negotiating transportation prices and I encountered a dishonest Uber driver here in Guanajuato. So I'm here in Guanajuato right now. Maya and I recorded this episode over the internet, and we had some technical difficulties in doing so. Hopefully those difficulties didn't shine through too much and you're able to understand everything in the episode. But yeah, things get a little more complicated when we record separately. And actually, Mai is listening to me record this right now because she wants to add her points, but I'm going to be the only one you hear in this episode. So she can add her 2 cents with some of the phrases. So in this episode, we talked about some cultural insights, some things you might want to be aware of when you're traveling anywhere, really, but travelers are often targeted in tourist areas due to their unfamiliarity with local pricing and customs, so that's where you really have to watch out, and that's where it helps to do your due diligence before you visit a new place. So we talked about the importance of being informed and assertive when you run into situations where someone's trying to take advantage of you. And at the beginning of this episode, I shared my account of how I dealt with a difficult situation with an Uber driver who basically just wanted to work for himself and use Uber to find clients, but then cancel on them and then have them pay in cash. So there were a few instances there where that driver was trying to take advantage of me, and I had to use some of the phrases we talked about in this episode. So that was really the inspiration for this. So the focus of this episode really is on a bunch of phrases you can use to help defend yourself in difficult situations like the one I was in. And we also gave some tips about staying informed about local customs and learning about average prices before traveling. So it's good to know these phrases just in case someone tries to take advantage of you. But we also tried to emphasize that scams happen all over the world. I've been scammed for more money in the United States than I ever have been in Mexico. Knock on wood, hopefully that doesn't change, but it could happen, right? It could happen anywhere. So this episode wasn't meant to scare you. We also talked about using caution with certain phrases that we mentioned in this episode, which we'll dive into a little bit more in just a moment. So how about we dive into the first word of this breakdown section, which is terracería. And this means dirt road. And here Mai said, hay bastante polvo en Comala especialmente, ¿no? Porque hay terracerías, las calles no son pavimentadas, son mayormente empedradas. So here Mai said, there's quite a bit of dust, especially in Comala, right? Because there are dirt roads, the streets are not paved, they're mostly cobblestoned. So again, the word here is terracería, which means dirt road. Terracería. Next up we have tener colmillo. This means to be street smart, savvy, sharp, cunning, but literally this means to have fang, so you can kind of get an idea of what it means just from the literal translation. And here Mai said, es que cuando uno está viajando, siento que la gente que se dedica a la industria del turismo, pues a veces tiene mucho colmillo, ¿no? Sabe cómo sacar provecho de las situaciones. So here Mai said, it's just that when you're traveling, I feel like the people who work in the tourism industry sometimes know how to work the system, right? They know how to take advantage of situations. So again, the phrase here is tener colmillo, which means to be street smart, savvy, sharp, or cunning. Again, it literally means to have fang. Moving on, we have turbio. This means murky, shady, or suspicious. And here I said, esto suena, ¿cómo dirías sketchy? ¿Una situación turbia? And I said, suena turbio. Sí. Ha 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 ha. And I said, sí. Suena turbio. And I said, sospechoso. So here I said, this sounds, how do you say, sketchy? A shady situation? And I said, sounds shady. Yes. Ha 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 ha. And I said, yes. Sounds shady. And I said, suspicious. Okay, so you can say una situación turbia or suena turbio. Mai says this sounds like maybe it's somewhat of a newer phrase, suena turbio, but I like it. I think there's a similar word in English, actually, that we didn't put in the translation here, but it's like muddy water, right? Kind of dirty, grimy water. So again, the word here is turbio, which means murky, shady, or suspicious. Next up, we have a bit of a clarification here. We're going to talk about ride versus raite. So ride is a viaje, and raite is a colloquial expression that is used to mean free car ride or hitchhiking in Mexican Spanish. So here, what I should have just said is viaje, but I said raite because I'm so used to hearing it in Mexican Spanish. So this is, again, a colloquial term that is often used to refer to a free car ride or hitchhiking. Just keep that in mind. It is even spelled like R-A-I-T-E, I think. So it just means a free ride, raite. So I said raite, and I should have said viaje because I wasn't asking for a free car ride or hitchhiking. I just wanted transportation. So my confusion here. So in the episode, I said, bueno, resulta que llegó el conductor y me dijo, oye, mira, puedes pagar en efectivo. Solo tienes que cancelar el raite. But I should have said viaje. So here I said, well, it turns out the driver arrived and told me, hey, look, you can pay in cash. You just need to cancel the ride. So again, we are clarifying the difference between ride versus raite. So the translation of ride from English to Spanish is viaje, and raite is a colloquial term in Mexican Spanish that is used to mean free car ride or hitchhiking. So you can say pedir un raite, and that would be to hitchhike. Or from a friend, you could say, me das un raite? And that is just a free car ride. Like, can you take me somewhere for free? You could also say, Juan me dio un raite después del trabajo. Like, Juan gave me a ride after work. But just be aware that they don't use ride or ride or any sort of variation of that in Mexican Spanish. It's raite, which is only for free car rides or hitchhiking. So next up we have caseta. This means toll booth. And here I said, pero bueno, empezamos el viaje y pocos minutos después llegamos a la caseta. Y ahí, en la caseta, me dijo como, oye, ¿puedes pagar la caseta? Y yo como, oigan a este. So here I said, anyway, we started the ride, and a few minutes later, we arrived at the toll booth. There at the booth, he told me, hey, can you pay the toll? And I was like, listen to this guy. So the little phrase here, oigan a este, is something we got from Colombia. They use it all the time, and mine, I think it's hilarious. I don't think it needs extra explanation when used in any other Spanish-speaking countries. The meaning is apparent, but it's just funny that we heard it used all the time. So Oigan a este, listen to this guy. Even when no one's around to listen to him, but it's just kind of like, I don't know. It almost sounds kind of like a narration commentary in a book or something. I don't know. I don't know how to explain it, but it's funny. You can say, oigan a estos, if you're talking to a group of people. So the word we're actually highlighting here is caseta, which means toll booth. Next up on the list, we have cinturón de seguridad. So seatbelt, a safety seatbelt, right? Because cinturón can also mean just belt. So depending on the context, here we're just talking about a seatbelt. So here I said, bueno, él iba muy rápido al aeropuerto, que estaba bien, se sentía seguro el carro, funcionaba el cinturón, que a veces no funciona en los taxis o en los Ubers. So here I said, well, he was driving very fast to the airport, which was fine, the car felt safe, and the seatbelt worked. Sometimes it doesn't work in taxis or Ubers. And I would clarify, actually, I think it's usually in taxis when the seatbelt doesn't work. I think the seatbelt almost always works in Ubers, so a little correction there. If you happen to get in a taxi in Mexico and the seatbelt doesn't work or isn't there, it's perfectly normal. I won't tell you to not worry because it is dangerous, but it's also pretty normal in Mexico. Mine says, just hold on to your seat. Agárrate. That's a good phrase that you could use in that situation. Hold on tight. So again, the word here was cinturón de seguridad, which is a safety seat belt or just a seat belt. Moving on, we have prueba superada. This means challenge overcome. So as I was continuing on with my story here about getting ripped off or almost ripped off by the Uber driver, I wanted to say crisis averted, and I didn't know how to say it. So here in the episode, I said, como crisis evitada? No sé. Bueno. Ja, 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 ja. And Mai said, okay. Crisis superada? Okay. So I said, like, crisis averted? I don't know. Well, ha 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 ha. And Mai said, okay, challenge overcome or what? So here my phrase is corrected in the transcript and the breakdown section. I could have said crisis evitada. So crisis avoided. And that's what I really wanted to say. I was trying to translate a phrase that we use in English into Spanish, and I had never used it before. So what I really wanted to say was crisis evitada. But what we're highlighting here is prueba superada, which means challenge overcome, which isn't exactly what I was trying to say, but it's another expression that we had the opportunity to share with you. So there you go. Prueba superada, challenge overcome. A little different from what I wanted to say, which was crisis averted, which is more like crisis evitada. Moving on, we have something I have a lot of trouble with, and I should really sit down and study this sometime, but ordinal numbers. I said veinteava, which means 20th. So this is correct, but there are other ways to say this. So you could say vigésima, and it also means 20th. So there's actually a pattern here, which again, I should study. So the numbers 11 and 12, as well as numbers corresponding to the tens and multiples of 100, have two forms of correct ordinal numbers, or accepted ways to use ordinal numbers. And they go like this. So 11 would be onceava, and it could also be undécima. 12 could be doceava, and it can also be duodécima. The word that I used, veinteava, is correct, but you could also say vigésima for 20, And for 30, you could say treintava, but you could also say trigésima. And then once you get into the hundreds, like 200, you could say doscientosava or ducentésima. And that pattern goes on and on. We're not going to cover all of the ordinal numbers here, but just so you have an idea and that you are aware that there are two correct ways to say ordinal numbers along these lines, or at least the ones that we just covered here. Not all ordinal numbers have two different ways of saying it. Like, el tercero is el tercero, the third, and that doesn't change, right? There's no other option. It's just el tercero. So here in the episode, I said, porque en los retiros de inmersión, pues muchas veces es como nuestra 20ava vez en la ciudad, y pues ya conocemos la ciudad muy bien. Sabemos cuánto cuestan las cosas. So here I said, because in the immersion retreats, it's often like our 20th time in the city, and we know the city very well, and we know how much things cost. So again, the word here was veinteava, which means 20th. And I would refer to the PDF of this breakdown section, if you have access to it, to study some of the other ordinal numbers when it gets into the 10s, 20s, 30s, hundreds. And I will take my own advice and come back to this as well so I can practice. A little tip, you can often avoid using ordinal numbers when you just say, he estado aquí 20 veces, right? I've been here 20 times. You don't have to say, this is my 20th time. And actually, I think I've said that we've been to Guanajuato 20 times, so many times that I'm almost positive that we've been here more than 20 times. I don't even know how it would be fair to count because we were here earlier. We were here like a month and a half ago for our other retreats, and then we went to Oaxaca and we're here again. So we've been here many, many times. These taxi drivers shouldn't be pulling anything on us. But anyway, that's why we recorded this episode. So next up we have reproche. This means reproach or blame. Very similar to English. Almost identical. There's just an extra E at the end of the word in Spanish. So here I said, entonces cambia el significado de esta frase y más bien está diciendo como you don't want to do this, ¿no? Como no me quieres o como es algo, no sé. Suena como un reproche, más bien. So here I said, so it changes the meaning of this phrase, and it's more like saying, you don't want to do this, right? Like, you don't want me, or it's something, I don't know. It sounds more like a reproach, really. So again, the word here is reproche, which means reproach or blame. This is where we were talking about the phrase, no me quieras ver la cara. I think for some people it helps to know that this is the subjunctive conjugation, but it's not actually the subjunctive. You just use the subjunctive conjugation when it's a negative imperative or a negative command. I prefer to keep them separate in my mind because, yeah, it does look like the subjunctive, but just know that you use the subjunctive conjugation in this type of command, a negative command, but it's not the subjunctive. Hopefully I'm not confusing you anymore. Sometimes with phrases like this, I just find it's best to memorize it and accept that that's just how it is. This is a phrase that is somewhat commonly used, and it's just best to kind of remember it. It's not like people go around all the time being like, don't mess with me, or don't try to fool me, or you don't want to do this. But in situations like this, it's not uncommon. You could use this sort of negative command in everyday conversations too, like, no me digas, right? Like, don't tell me. And you're using the subjunctive conjugation. It's just the negative imperative, the negative command, don't tell me, which really in context means something like, really? Or, wow, I can't believe it. No me digas. Moving on, we have cordura. This means sanity, composure, or level-headedness. And here my said, porque a veces hasta para pelear tenemos que mantener el respeto y la cordura. So here my said, because sometimes even when we fight, we have to maintain respect and sanity. So again, the word here was cordura, which means sanity, composure, or level-headedness. And this reminded me of our time in Colombia where people would yell at each other if they're angry. Maybe there's like road rage or a pedestrian yelling at a car who didn't wait for them or something along those lines. And they use the usted form. So they're like simultaneously being angry and upset at one another and calling each other names, but using formal speech to communicate to one another. So it's almost like there's this underlying respect for one another, even while yelling at each other. It's just a hilarious combination to me. And I know for my too, just some of the exchanges we heard while we were in Colombia, it's like, wow, they're maintaining that level of respect, even though they're angry at each other. But Mai says she thinks what's going on there is just that usted is what is most commonly used. So I guess in Mexico, in pretty much any situation like that, I feel like most of the time you would use the informal way of speaking, the informal you, but in Colombia, the usted form is like the standard. So that's why it sounds funny to people who have learned Mexican Spanish or people from Mexico, but to Colombians, it's perfectly normal. Again, the word here was cordura, which means sanity, composure, or level-headedness. Next up is a very common phrase in Spanish. This is a lo chino, which means in the Chinese way or like the Chinese do. So the phrase a lo chino is a colloquial expression in Mexican Spanish that refers to a situation where someone takes advantage of an arrangement or transaction by charging more than originally agreed upon or changing the terms after the fact. So this is a racially charged term, but it's used frequently in Mexico. Nevertheless, this is very Mexican overall, right? It's like when people call each other gordito or flaca or güero, all of these things that we would avoid using in the US that are generally just unacceptable to use. Mexicans use it. So I understand how this probably sounds extremely racist in English, but you have to understand a little bit of the cultural context. Like, it's not a phrase that we recommend using, but it is a phrase that you should be aware that exists and it is used and you should know what it means just in case you ever run across this. So in the episode, Mai said, como que se cobró de más o como que te cobró automáticamente una propina ya. Y esta situación podría describirse con la frase se cobró a lo chino o cobrarse a lo chino. So Mai said, it's like he charged extra, or like he automatically charged you a tip. And this situation could be described with the phrase se cobró a lo chino or cobrarse a lo chino. So Mai just shared with me some historical context. So she read that supposedly this phrase comes from a time where there was a lot of Chinese immigration in Mexico, and they didn't speak Spanish very well, so they were easily tricked or duped by the Mexicans. So they kept on getting ripped off by the Mexicans, but then they got smart, and as sort of like a revenge, they started doing this. They started charging more than originally agreed upon and that sort of thing. And so this sort of revenge ended up leading to this term cobrarse a lo chino. So a lo chino again means in the Chinese way or like the Chinese do. Okay, Mai just gave me a good example of how this phrase would work. So one example could be if you have a credit card with a bank and you don't pay it on time, but then the bank automatically charges you, let's say from your debit card or your checking account, the amount that you owed on your card without your permission. They just kind of do it automatically. That is a good example of them cobrándose a lo chino. So they are deciding to charge you anyway, even if you haven't paid, just because, well, you have money in this other account, so we're going to take it out of there. Mai says it's a little bit illegal, but I don't know. I feel like the concept of legality in Mexico is another topic worth exploring because we're so used to, if something is illegal in the United States, it's like, oh, I'm going to sue you, or I'm going to take you to court, or we're going to, fight this. And well, theoretically that exists in Mexico. Practically, it doesn't work that way. It's like there are laws on the books that people just generally ignore and nobody ever gets in trouble for. And then there are other things where it's like the police get to kind of choose what they want to enforce. So a law in Mexico doesn't really mean as much, I don't think, as it does in the United States. And that can take some adjusting to. And often people aren't informed about their rights here in Mexico. I could say that's true in the United States too. And a lot of people, you fall into situations where maybe you could have defended yourself, but you didn't know. And so you just let it go. That happens a lot in Mexico too. Next up, we have me prestas, which means, can you lend me? And you could add like X number of pesos. Me prestas 100 pesos? Or can I borrow 100 pesos, 100 pesos from you? And here Mai said, tu amigo Juan te dijo, oye Jaime, fíjate que necesito 500 pesos porque, no sé, no alcanzo a pagar toda la renta. ¿Me prestas? Y tú le dices, sí. Here Mai said, your friend Juan tells you, hey Jaime, I need 500 pesos because, I don't know, I can't pay the full rent. Can you lend me some? And you say, yes. So again, the phrase here is me prestas, which means, can you lend me? Or can I borrow? And then you could say, some money from you. 100 pesos, 1000 pesos, 100,000 pesos, etc. And for the last phrase of this breakdown section, we have quedar a mano, which means to settle up or to be even. And here Mai said, le prestas dinero y no sé, unos meses después, tú vas a su casa y en lugar de darte el pago o darte el dinero que te pidió, te regala un pastel y te dice, pues ya, ahí quedamos a mano, ¿no? Con lo que me prestaste. Here Mai said, you lend him money and, I don't know, a few months later, you go to his house and instead of returning the money he owes you, he gives you a cake and he says, oh, well, that's it. We're even now, right? For what you lent me. That is another example of cobrarse a lo chino. In this little example that Mai made up here, you could say, oigan a este? Like, look at this guy. Deciding that we're even now just because. Oh, and the other phrase that we added at the end of the episode, no le pierdes. So that's like, oh, are you sure you're not losing? In a very sarcastic way. You're not losing in this transaction. So again, the phrase here is quedar a mano. which means to settle up or to be even. And I really think this is one of the most useful travel Spanish episodes that we have published. There are a lot of great phrases here that are really worth practicing. Honestly, I think it's kind of a Minnesotan thing to be super nice and non-confrontational. And so I find these situations to be extremely uncomfortable. And I am actively doing my best to just get used to defending myself without getting kind of nervous and frustrated and having kind of that fight or flight response. I just don't like these situations at all. But I recognize that you have to get used to it if you want to be a seasoned traveler and defend yourself and your money. Like I said in this episode, you can really save a lot of money just being like, you know what? I don't like these uncomfortable situations, but I also don't like getting ripped off. So I'm going to use all the resources I have to stick up for myself. And that was kind of the happy ending of the story that I spent the first 10 minutes of this episode telling, is I was able to stick up for myself and ultimately didn't get ripped off. So hopefully you can use some of these phrases to also not get ripped off in situations where people are trying to take advantage of you. I hope you enjoyed this episode a lot. And if you have any questions, as always, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to help. Y hasta la próxima.